Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Campus Movie Fest workshops. My name is Byron Gamble, and I'm the School Partnership Manager for Campus Movie Fest and the moderator for tonight's workshop. As you all know, things are a little different with the pandemic, so to allow for a more interactive experience, Campus Movie Fest has put together a series of workshops to help teach students a variety of filmmaking tools. This week's workshop is on editing with our guest speaker, Andrew Leverett. He serves as a director of post-production at Ideas United and has been a post-production professional since 2014. His editing work has been nationally broadcasted on ESPN, HLN, CNN Airport, and the Golf Channel. He continues to edit short films and independent projects alongside his day job. And he's a former CMF participant, so he's a part of the family. Andrew now leads a team of editors and has mentored many editors early in their career. And also during this whole workshop, please feel free to, at the bottom of your screen, to submit any questions. We'll kind of be breaking it up into segments and we'll do Q&As after each one. And without further ado, I would like to bring Andy on to start his first topic. Andy, take it away.
Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm really excited to be doing this. I am a former CMF participant, so it really feels like an honor. And yeah, I've got this nice fun introduction video to kick us off. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. I think you'll enjoy it.
Editing, something that's easy to learn the basics of quickly, but can take decades to master. I'm Andy Leverett, Director of Post-Production at Ideas United, and I'm excited that you're here to see my workshop about the basics of editing. Most importantly, I'd like to teach you how to edit quickly, because with Campus Movie Fest, you've got 1 week, and I'm gonna show you how to do it as fast as possible. Here we go.
All right, hopefully you all thought that was pretty cool. Yeah, so I'm going to be going over all sorts of things in this in this tutorial here. And yeah, please submit your questions as we go through. I've got a lot of things to cover. But first, I want to go ahead and tell you about my editing philosophy. I've been editing it's been a very long time. I started in 2004 was when I did my first project. And I've developed a lot of theories as to best practices. And I like teaching people all my different thoughts on things. And one of the things that I really like to start off with is what I call the 3 C's of editing. Now that is cutting, corrective, and creative. Now, cutting is the idea of the simple act of setting in and out points and selecting, bits of clips that we're going to bud together to create your story. Corrective is everything you do to color and audio to make it sound its best and to look its best. And creative is everything else from adding text and transitions and creative edits that you can do in very complex ways with things like keyframes. So I'm excited to go through all sorts of different topics here. Before we get going though, I want to go ahead and clarify that I'm going to make some assumptions that all of you to a certain extent have messed around with editing software a bit, whether it's on your laptop or on your phone. So there's going to be a couple things that I'm going to be skipping over for the sake of time, and things like how to import clips, explaining the different windows. But what I do want to know, if you could throw it in the chat, is if you understand what keyframing is. If you don't know what keyframing is at all, I'd like to hear that. And if you have specific questions about it, please ask me, because there's so much to say. And so I'm going to be talking about keyframing, and I just want to make sure that that doesn't go over anyone's head, because I'm happy to dive in a little bit deeper. So the first topic in the same format, where I'm going to be playing videos for you, is, let's see here. This is a fun one. What editing software to use. Now, Adobe Premiere has been my go-to for, I'd say 7 or 8 years now, but I was a Final Cut guy before that. And so this is an interesting topic for a lot of people, and I think this would be a great way to kick things off. So this will be the first video, and I'm going to share that right now.
As someone who edits, I'm sure you've heard that there are several alternatives to Adobe Premiere. And you may ask yourself, is there better editing software for my Campus Movie Fest film than Premiere? My answer to that is no. Now, that could be up for debate. I'm going to give you my reasoning. Why Premiere is the best software for Campus Movie Fest is that is what all of your support staff and what all of your peers are going to be using by default. Now, there are no rules against using other editing software. However, you're going to be in a situation where you're more on your own, especially if you're going with more Windows-based software. So if you, for whatever reason, are using Sony Vegas, for instance, Campus Movie Fest is probably not going to be able to support you if you run into technical problems. Avid is a similar situation. Some people in Campus Movie Fest may be able to help more with Final Cut X, but when it comes to your Campus Movie Fest film, not knowing what could happen, you're taking the least amount of risk if you stick with Premiere. Premiere currently has the largest market share for filmmakers across the filmmaking landscape, and I'm sure for some of the people who are studying film, you've heard that Avid is currently the industry standard when it comes to Hollywood film editing. I'm going to give you a little bit of insight as to what that's about and why, unless in some certain cases, I recommend that you don't use Avid. Avid is made for a work environment where you have access to Avid hardware. You can have Avid installed on a laptop or a desktop and it will work. However, Avid is optimized for utilizing Avid acceleration hardware and Avid servers. So if you have Avid servers and that type of acceleration hardware that you can buy with Avid, Avid is extremely powerful. If you don't have that, Premiere is actually much more optimized for consumer grade computers. And when I'm talking about consumer grade, I'm talking about brand new MacBook Pros. Premiere can handle all sorts of footage better out of the box and having to convert footage less than Avid. So I recommend, if you want to learn Avid for your career and how it might be used down the road, that's great. But for your Campus Movie Fest film, you're going to have an easier time with Premiere, in my opinion.
All right, so with that, hopefully that explains why the rest of this tutorial will be focusing on Premiere. I'm not in particular Adobe fanboy or anything like that. It's just after all the experimenting I've done with all the different nonlinear editing systems, I do believe that Premiere is the best for most cases, especially for Campus Movie Fest. So moving right along, the very first thing to do when you're beginning your editing journey for your film is to make sure you get organized. You're going to be getting in plenty of footage from whether you're a one-man or one-woman band, or if you're working with a team, you'll likely be getting in several different deliveries of SD card footage. And if you don't keep it organized, well, you'll see in my next video why that could be a problem. So I'm going to cue that up now. Oh. Looks like I selected the wrong video. Sorry about that.
One of the things that I only learned the importance of after Campus Movie Fest was keeping your project organized within bins within your Premiere project and to not have everything scattered and unlabeled all over the place. Now, if you're editing by yourself, a lot of times you'll be tempted not to spend the time to organize your sub-project file system within Premiere. Labeling and tagging different clips may seem like a large preparation that may not be necessary. If you are editing by yourself, I understand that in your head, you may understand how everything is laid out and it may not matter to you. However, let me try to convince you to do it anyways. And I'll tell you why. When you begin an edit, things may be very laid out in your head to where untitled sequence 1 and untitled sequence 3 and untitled sequence 7 all mean different things to you. However, as the days go on and as you become more exhausted in your Campus Movie Fest sprint week, you may start to forget what some of those things are. And especially in the critical hours where you're trying to finish up the final touches of your film, wasting time digging through your file system is not going to allow you to focus on what's important at that moment. And so in the beginning, when you have time, that's the time to do it and not to fumble around in the end. The other important reason is collaboration. Now, again, if you plan on being the only person to edit your film, this may not seem necessary to you. However, if you're working with anyone else in your film project, and let's just say you unexpectedly become sick the last 2 days of your film, to the point where you need to close your eyes and you shouldn't be editing. Well, do you want your Campus Movie Fest film to not make it to the premiere? If you have your bins within your project and your files organized, someone else can pick up your work and understand what's going on. And if they're stuck looking at untitled sequence 3 and files named 049.jpg, they're going to have to relearn everything in order to pick up where you left off. If you leave details and you leave your project to where anyone could understand what's happening within a minute or two of picking it up, you're going to be in a much better position because you never know when you may need to collaborate.
All right. Now, one of the reasons why that is important and often overlooked is because it's a little bit boring. We haven't really even gotten into our project yet and get into the fun stuff like cutting, but that's kind of the point. You're going to be tempted to not do that. I know I was for a very long time. It's really only after I graduated and after Campus Movie Fest that I saw the need to do that, because I started collaborating with teams more, but that shouldn't exclude you too. Do it for Campus Movie Fest and get in the habit. It's going to be handy. Now, what's next here is I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead to audio a little bit. And what I want to talk about after that is keyboard shortcuts. I should really talk about keyboard shortcuts first, but I want to get into some more fun stuff. So one of the things that could really kill your project in the sense of maybe it won't make the premiere because it's not high quality enough in comparison to your student rivals, or what could just bring the quality of your film down to where I know you want to it to do well nationally and to be recognized. That's audio and having bad audio. So I'm going to dive in here about the importance of stable audio and why it's critical to have stable audio. Here we go.
You don't have to have your film necessarily as loud as everyone else's. That's something that's easily adjustable. What you don't want is for your film to be very loud and very quiet, and very loud and very quiet, unless you specifically intend to do that. Otherwise, that's perceived as very annoying and can hurt people's ears, because If the audio operator turns up your film so that people can hear the dialogue, and then suddenly there's screaming or there's gunshots that are very loud, that's gonna hurt people's ears in the Premiere. Now, if the audio operator has your film turned down and no one can hear your dialogue because they wanna make sure that the gunshots and the screaming is not gonna blow people's ears out, then no one can understand your film, and that's arguably worse. So having stable audio is important, and so making sure that all of your audio falls within reasonable parameters relative to each other is what's key. There's a couple of guiding metrics that I could recommend, and the most common one is to have your audio fall between -6 decibels and -12 decibels. That's a recommendation that you'll commonly hear. Here are some other rules and guidelines I recommend you consider. If your audio drops beneath -30 decibels, there's a good chance that you won't be able to make out dialogue, or you won't be able to hear all bits of music, all the different instruments. So -30 starts to become the danger zone of what's too low to be heard. And if you're not familiar with what peaking means, if your audio goes beyond 0 decibels, which is the limit, in other words, of what is too loud, your audio will begin to distort. Now, the problem with this is you can damage speaker systems if your film peaks in its audio. So you don't want to have audio that goes above 0. In fact, a lot of times films are checked to make sure that they don't go above 0 just because it is such a problem. So if your film is not peaking and all the audio is hitting above -30, it should be passable. But the closer that you get to a range of relative loudness around the -6 to -12 range, the better off you're gonna be.
So I know that for me, learning that lesson between -6 and -12 was very important. And if you talk to other people, and in some other cases, just for clarity, that's just a guideline. Some people will tell you that closer to -0 is good, especially for internet videos and stuff that goes on broadcast television. A lot of times that has a standard that's needs to be lower than -12 on average. But that's a guiding principle. And as the main thing is stability in your audio, that's what is going to be key for having a nice experience when your film premieres. So moving right along, we did get a question about music, I believe, and I'm hoping that this upcoming video here is going to answer that question. So let's go ahead and kick that off.
Understanding what your film needs for certain scenes to hit and experimenting with different song options is important. But if you're working with a library that's very small, you're going to only have a certain amount of control over what could be much more impactful if you just had the right song. You have to use music that's license free, meaning that it's been cleared to where you are able to use that song without having to pay royalties to the owner. Campus Movie Fest provides its students license-free music. However, if you don't find the song that's just right for you, there are services like premiumbeat.com and audiojungle.net that have virtually unlimited amount of music options, to where you can type in search words like the mood or the instrument or the genre of music, even the beats per minute sometimes, and you can really refine exactly the song that's right for you. Most of the songs you'll be working with are instrumentals, but if you have the option to utilize lyrics, do consider from time to time having little pops of a song lyric show up in your film at just the right moment, especially if that song lyric is relevant to what's happening in the scene. It's just a fun little thing that I recommend experimenting with, because sometimes if you find the right song with the right little lyric, it can add a little magic moment to your film that really pushes the quality even further over the edge. It's always very fun to find that perfect song, and it's really like a needle in a haystack. So take the time, and if you have friends who can help you search, a lot of times having several people doing a music search at once is a much better option than having a single editor look for hours and hours.
All right, and looking back at the question that was asked, it was from Zach Martin, who asked, what's the best places to use royalty-free music from, and when posting and submitting a film somewhere, do you have to prove that the music is in fact royalty-free? Great question. So I hopefully answered the first one about where to get it from. So yeah, Campus Movie Fest provides Comma currently, which is a really great service. And then if that isn't enough, there's these other services. Typically, no, you don't need to prove that you have royalty-free music as long as you do have it. When you buy royalty-free music, it does come with a license that you can download alongside that, or it'll be emailed to you just depending on what service you use. As long as you haven't as long as you have purchased it for yourself for that particular project, you should be able to prove it if there's some issue with, I believe the word is like indemnity. But that is, as long as you're playing by the rules, you're not going to have any problems at all. Also, there are electronic checks for that. When YouTube flags copyrighted content, it's all done, through artificial intelligence. So that's the main thing that, to look out for. Usually computers will catch you if you try to do funny business. All right, Byron?
And Andy, I had just two questions for you. The first one was, how do you find the easiest way to name files? Because you were talking about organization. Is there a standard way that you should be looking at naming all your files, so if you pass that on to someone, it's pretty easily recognizable and transcoded?
So that's a great question. And the answer is yes, it is important, especially when working on projects with big teams. Now, there isn't a particular file name mechanism that is best. What's best is what works best for you and your team. So I know that my team uses a pretty long one that includes the initials of the editor, the date, and the project code, and a few other things like that. So it's a pretty lengthy one, but we all as a team determined that that's what we wanted. And so people tend to stick to it. And so to develop that own system for your team, it's just a conversation that needs to take place. And you have to consider who are the kind of stakeholders that want to be part of that decision.
Awesome. And then Marcos from Cal State Long Beach asked, how do you balance the sounds of multiple clips with different volume levels in the same sequence?
Okay, yeah. So there's several ways of doing that. And what I would recommend, what I prefer to use is the tool that's called Gain. If you right click on the audio of whatever clip you'd like to adjust, you can dial in decibels such as I'd like to turn this down -6.5, or I'd like to turn this down if it's like a song that's near peaking, you'll want to turn it down by like -20. And when you have multiple layers like that, the audio as it plays on top of each other will actually influence the total amount of decibels, to where even if you have one at -20 and another at -20, when they play together, it can hit -12 or -15. So it's kind of an interesting experimental game of pushing some up, pushing some down until it sounds just right. And another thing too is that determining, the decibel counter is really just a useful tool. Now, obviously, you don't want it to peak, so it is critical in some regards. But having a nice pair of headphones beyond just, small earbuds, something that's got a little bit of bass, or putting your film on something that like a sound system for a television or something like that. You just want to make sure that you can make out the dialogue and that the music isn't overwhelming. But in terms of where the decibels land, that's entirely up to you.
Awesome. And then my last question is, do you prefer one website for sound effects versus music? Do you find one to be more helpful, or what direction would you go?
Yeah, so for music, Premium Beat is the go-to, and it has been for me for years. I've used a bunch of them, and the reason why I like Premium Beat is the pricing is good and consistent. Whereas I've been on other sites to where occasionally you may need, in some instances, you may need to buy what's called an extended license. Like for instance, if you're gonna broadcast your film, it does so well that it's going to be broadcasted on television, or it's going to be played in a movie theater somewhere. You may have to buy an extended license to cover yourself because a standard license is for smaller audiences. And so with Premium Beat, you get great pricing, and there's no funny business when it comes to that. So I always recommend them. When it comes to sound effects, soundsnap.com, I believe is what it's called. Soundsnap is great. And I mean, they have everything. That's all I can really say. Like, I don't, I'm going to say like probably 95% of the time when I go searching, I find exactly what I'm looking for. And it's even weird stuff. It's like literally like a 2005 Chrysler door closing. Like it can be really specific. So, and yeah, I've done a bunch of videos that are like golf related, and they have so many different swings, and you can break it down by what like 9-iron or 7-iron. It's like ridiculous. So yeah.
That's wild. And then the last question that we just got in is, any tips for editing for YouTube versus Instagram, or big screens versus iPhones? And I know we're kind of talking about audio right now, so if that gets answered in the next segment, completely fine too. But
oh, it's all good. Yeah, I'm really excited to hear these questions. So keep them coming in. So yeah, I mean, the medium that you're creating for, it's so important. Now, I do a lot of work where we have we're creating something for TV, or essentially like a master that can go out in like a large format, like, broadcast TV, or, in theory, in a movie theater. And so it is widescreen typically how we start. But when we know that we're going to be shooting a project that ultimately will end up on Instagram, or other kind of cell phone based things, we keep the aspect ratios of what we're shooting in mind. So we might film a little bit wider so that we can film in 4K or higher if possible, so that we can position the frames differently, the same shots differently, to where they can fit these different screens. Because, if you're filming something for, a widescreen format, like how we're looking at each other right now, you're at the right distance, Byron, to where if we were to slice vertically, we could get your entire face. But if your face was closer in, if one of your eyeballs can't make within the shot, it's no good. So it's certainly something to consider. The other thing too is with these different mediums like Instagram, it really changes a lot of times the objectives of the edit, to where, to make it fit, we need to make it 60 seconds or less. So sometimes we create like a long cut for net, and then, but we're targeting 60 seconds as our primary. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to consider there, and it's very like open-ended, but the answer is yes. And not only yes, you should keep that in mind, especially moving forward in the future, because cell phones aren't going away. In fact, I have this weird theory that like, I know that like TVs are like all wide right now, but like I think this like vertical screen is going to become just as popular as wide within a couple decades.
That's awesome. I was just going to ask about aspect ratio. You were touching on that a little bit. Does a certain aspect ratio read a certain way? Like, does widescreen mean more narrative film telling versus 4:3? Or kind of describe to me what different aspect ratios might translate to the viewer.
I have a video just for you then. So I'm going to play that back really quick. And thank you for the segue. All right, one moment.
One of the things that you'll likely see in your Campus Movie Fest premiere is a film that's shot what looks to be an anamorphic. If you're unfamiliar with what anamorphic means, it comes from a time where film was shot in a stretched format and projected using a lens that unstretched it to where the film is seen in a very widescreen format beyond the standard 16:9 ratio, whether that's in 1080p or 4K. This is going to give you crop bars at the top and bottom of your film. Now, this is utilized in Campus Movie Fest to give a more professional and more cinematic film look. And a lot of Campus Movie Fest participants use this to add style to their film. You can shoot in this anamorphic crop in certain cameras, but you don't need to have a camera that shoots anamorphic to achieve the same effect. In Premiere, you can easily crop the top and bottoms of your image using the crop effect. All you have to do is to know the crop ratio and to line it up just right, and essentially you get the exact same effect without having a special camera. And if you know that you want to utilize the anamorphic film style in your film and your camera doesn't do that out of the box, an easy solution is to put little pieces of tape over the screen, knowing where you're going to roughly crop. And that way when you're shooting, you can see what's going to make the frame and what's not without having to digitally push up and down your image to fix it afterwards using position and scale in Premiere.
So Byron, I hope that answered your question in part. And what's interesting about anamorphic is when I started Campus Movie Fest, I shot my first one in 1080p, and then I saw the potential of doing something with aspect ratio. So the next film that I made actually was intentionally in 4:3, which is, as you know, like the old CTR TVs, which was the standard for decades and decades, because my film was supposed to be based in the 50s, and so it was black and white 4:3. And then at one point in a dream sequence, it goes to full color and wide. So messing around with the aspect ratio gives a lot of possibilities, but anamorphic is the one that really, I don't know, whenever I was watching Campus Movie Fest films and an anamorphic one came on, it's like, uh-oh, these people know what they're doing. Like, not every single time did that pan out, but typically the anamorphic ones are like the good ones. Just saying. I don't know if that's like a little hint, but that's my thoughts on it at least. But anyways, another thing, earlier I saw that Diamond Paris asked a question that I wasn't exactly sure, Diamond, if you're listening, what your question was. It's about editing style and choosing between two clips. I think I have a video that's going to cover that, but if you're able to write in and just clarify your question a little bit more, I'd be happy to answer it more precisely if I can. Yeah, Byron, do you have something for me? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. One question we just got as well is, what should directors remember when giving direction to an editor? What works well and what doesn't, especially in relation to aspect ratio?
Okay, so in relation to aspect ratio, what you're going to want to do is have a director have a clear vision from the beginning. And if the director does not have a clear vision of if they want it to be standard 1080p widescreen or anamorphic, what the editor can do after the fact, not recommended, but is possible, is to digitally push whatever was recorded up and down. So if you film in 1080p and you're like, wow, this really would be so much better in anamorphic, what you would do is you would apply those black bars either by an overlay or cropping, and then probably bits of your image are going to be cut off. So if I film myself like this, and then we were going to crop in the bars, I'd lose a bit of my hair and a little bit of my shirt. And so what I would do is digitally push myself to where that's probably the frame, or maybe a little bit like this. And that's actually a thing. You kind of have to just push it around with position to try to figure out. And it's kind of cool to have that option sometimes, but the more that you can plan ahead to where you don't have to make that decision in post. So hopefully that answers your question there. The director should really think it through before the editor has to deal with it, but editor can help, and the director can even, I guess, suggest or influence where things should be positioned if it comes to that.
And is there a way to do that in your camera, like with the GH4? Is there a way to make it where you can see exactly the aspect ratio that you're going to be doing in post, like with a grid system or anything like that?
So yeah, there are like helpful overlays within GH4s and GH5s. To my understanding, it doesn't shoot native anamorphic. That camera doesn't. And so that tape trick actually should come in handy. I know when I was doing Campus Movie Fest, I used that tape trick and it worked really well. It doesn't have to be even like, I even recommend just a little bit of normal like Scotch tape that's like a little bit cloudy. So you can kind of still see things behind it, but you just remember to think about anamorphic. So yeah, the GH4 and GH5, I don't know if it has guides specifically for anamorphic. I kind of feel like it doesn't. So yeah, do keep that tape trick in mind because it's helpful.
Awesome, thank you. And that's all the questions for right now. Thank you.
Great, cool. All right, so let's see here. The last thing we discussed. Okay, so we've gone through some fun stuff. I'm gonna do one more fun one, and then I'm gonna go back to keyboard shortcuts because it's important. This hopefully is gonna be, I don't know. I'm kind of proud of the developments I've made with this. This is about Warp Stabilizer. So if you haven't used Warp Stabilizer before, you are missing out because it's a really awesome tool. I know quite a bit about it, and I'm going to dive in because I've done a lot of experimenting with it, and I feel like I know it well. So let's go ahead and jump right over to that.
Warp Stabilizer is an extremely useful tool for your Campus Movie Fest film because it's going to take what is often shot on a DSLR, and which is a small lightweight camera, and is going to give it a more professional, cinematic, heavier camera feel. Now, what you'll notice when you look at professional productions is that rarely is there camera shake unless it's intentional. And when you're shooting on a DSLR or a cell phone or whatever smaller consumer grade or mid-level grade camera, most likely it's going to be a lighter weight system. And you'll notice that in your footage where micro shakes, or especially if you have to run and you're not using a special stabilizing gimbal, you're going to see shake, and it's best that you remove that shake in order to have a smooth and professional looking product in the end. So Warp Stabilizer is the tool that you would utilize in Premiere to remove the shake. And it's a powerful tool, but it can be used in all sorts of ways that will actually make conditions worse sometimes. And so what I'd like to do is to break down to you my recommendations for how to use this tool. Now you'll see an example here of when Warp Stabilizer is making the footage look extremely warpy, and that's where it gets its name. What it's doing is it's what is called subspace warp, and that's where the computer looks at many different areas within your image and tries to morph and warp the image to get the shake out. The problem is that morphing can be noticeable and it is amateur looking. So if you change settings within your Warp Stabilizer tool, you can remove what is over stabilization and over warping to get something that looks more pleasant. So the default settings for Warp Stabilizer are 50%. And if you review the results of that Warp Stabilizer and you're unsatisfied because it looks very unnatural and warpy, my next recommended number to try out is 9%. I've had a lot of good luck with 9%. Now, you'd think a jump from 50% to 9% is drastic. However, when you see the results, even though the numbers are very different, the results can be pretty subtle. And 9% often will solve problems. Now, if 9% does not work, the next number I recommend would be 1%. Once again, what a drastic number, 1%, how effective could that be? But actually 1% can be just the right amount to get out a lot of shake that's noticeable, however, still maintaining the natural flow of the camera movement to where not all of the shake is taken out, but some of the juddery effects caused by the shake is removed. Now, even at 1%, depending on your footage, this may not work. And the next step, and you're running out of options at this point, but the next good step is to try not using subspace warp. So if you go into other settings, you'll see there's a more classic style of stabilization that's actually not subspace warping at all, and it's utilizing scale, position, and rotation intelligently to move those dials around to try to stabilize it that way without subspace analyzation. And this can be a good result as well too. Now, if you cannot succeed with any four of those options, you are basically out of luck. However, that is still often better than utilizing a warp stabilizer to where it looks like you threw an effect on there that was overutilized. Sometimes just taking the shake for what it is a better option than using a warp stabilizer inappropriately.
All right, so I hope that was informative in terms of the technical, like dialing in those numbers. Like once again, so 50 is what you get out of the box. If that doesn't work, it doesn't look good, try 9%, 1%, and then try using position, scale, and rotation instead of subspace warp. And then just give up after that, because if it's that shaky, then it either needs to be reshot or you should just accept it as being shaky and make it part of the style. Okay, so like I said, I went into some fun stuff to get some things kicked off here. I'm going to go into something that's important now, which is keyboard shortcuts and the importance of that. This is a shorter video, so I'm going to go ahead and get that started now.
As an editor, being able to edit quickly is a skill that relies heavily on you knowing your tool. So getting plenty of practice with your editing system is the best way to do that. Experience is what's going to count there. But one of the things that you'll pick up along your editing journey is how to use keyboard shortcuts and the power of keyboard shortcuts. Essentially, studies have shown that when you have to use the mouse in many instances in software like Premiere, you're losing a lot of time. These seconds add up. I know you're thinking, oh, I could easily go up to a menu, it doesn't take that much longer. But pressing a key and being able to jump to the next move by pressing another key, when you're editing for hours at a time, that adds up quickly. And what's most important is keyboard shortcuts allow you to not break your flow with movements with your hands that essentially can be optimized. And that's what keyboard shortcuts are all about, is optimizing your tool and optimizing your time. So depending on what editing software you use, the keyboard shortcuts can be different. So if you are a Final Cut person and now you're a Premiere person, you've had to learn probably a whole different set of hotkeys, and that can be annoying. However, Premiere offers different hotkey layouts that actually, if you've learned hotkeys on a different software and you're editing on Premiere, you can set the hotkeys to reflect Final Cut X's hotkeys, for example. One of the hotkeys that I use all the time that is universal across all different editing platforms is I and O, and that stands for in and out. Every editing software utilizes in and out points because the concept is universal across editing. And another hotkey that you'll see across the different platforms, regardless of what you're using, is L, K, and J. Now, L, K, and J is forward, pause, rewind in almost all of these editing systems, certainly in Premiere. And what's great is to have your 3 fingers on those 3 keys and to toggle reverse, play, and fast forward. And why that's helpful is, once again, instead of having to pick up your mouse and to toggle around and to click and drag, this is going to allow you to scrub through footage very efficiently. And so I recommend utilizing I and O for in and out, K, J, and L for fast forward, rewind. And what's nice is that all of those keys are all right next to each other. So you'll get familiar with having your right hand in that area. And yes, you'll move your hand around the keyboard all over the place, but that's a good place to keep, almost like a home row key situation.
You know, it's funny, watching that video, one story that I thought of as I was watching that, which is completely true, is that, so I really got good at editing when I got my first laptop. Like, I had desktops growing up and started with Windows Movie Maker. So I've been messing around with it for a long time. But when I got my first laptop, in Final Cut 7, actually, back in the day, I noticed I developed this weird death grip where, like, it's like the top of the laptop where the fan, like, there was that little hole in MacBook Pros where you have the screen and you have the base and then you have like that fan exhaust. So I kind of like latch onto it with my fingers, and I use the, like, whatever fingers still remain to get to that home row that I was just talking about for those buttons. And to this day, I feel like whenever I get my serious editing on, it's always on a laptop, and having that death grip, I watch it happen. It's like this hand thing that I just like form to. And what's funny is I've currently got the newer MacBook Pro, and it has that touch bar. Totally throws off my game. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's interesting. So yeah, I just really wanted to highlight the importance of keyboard shortcuts, because I wasn't a believer for a long time. And then someone showed me how much more efficient it is to hit plus and minus when you're zooming in and zooming out, instead of like using your mouse to do that. And so yeah, I'm a believer now. Byron.
Yeah, I get the death grip thing. Absolutely. Made me laugh. And then we just had a participant ask, if I don't want to pay for the Adobe Premiere subscription, does iMovie have enough tools that Premiere has to suffice? Or is there another free video editing software that is better?
Great question. And the answer is yes, there is better software and it's free. If you know iMovie, I'm not going to say not to use iMovie. I think that, like, the tool that you know best, especially, like, I don't know, if your Premiere is coming up soon, I would say go with what you know. Like, you don't endanger your project by trying to learn something more advanced. But if you do have time, totally, yeah, like totally move on. iMovie is a great tool, but if you're looking for a free thing, DaVinci Resolve for sure. DaVinci Resolve has a free version and a paid version, but the free version is like really good. The only thing that you can't get with the free version is there's like very advanced features, and then there's a couple of resolutions, like you can't export to 8K. You don't really need to do that anyway. So yeah, I would even say that, like, DaVinci Resolve is the only, at this point, major rival for Premiere for like, I guess you could just say, like, the new breed of editor. You know, I was talking about in my first video the role that Avid plays, and yeah, there is this software called Avid First. That is free software too, but it's severely limited, severely, to where don't waste your time with that. If you're looking for something free and good, try DaVinci Resolve. You'll be glad you did, because not only that, it literally has the best color grading tools on the market. In fact, that is a great segue to my next video, if that's cool. Now, Byron, do you have any other questions before I do that?
Perfectly. Let's go with the segue. Love it.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, then what we're going to talk about next is Lumetri color. Now, I'm going in on Lumetri color, and that's the Premiere color grading and color correction tool of choice. And I'm going to be talking about DaVinci Resolve in this video. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Yeah, I go pretty in depth with this one. I hope you enjoy.
Premiere out of the box comes with a built-in, extremely powerful and simple color grading effect called Lumetri color. Now, there are other alternatives to color grading your footage. You've probably heard of DaVinci Resolve. And although DaVinci Resolve is the industry standard and many people swear by it, I would like to encourage you to see what Lumetri color can offer you, because not having to leave Premiere and getting the same results is going to be more efficient, and you'll be able to make changes later faster rather than having to jump in and out of one software to the other, exporting your results. If you've heard of DaVinci Resolve, you know that movies and TV shows are color graded on it, and if you know how to use DaVinci Resolve and you prefer to use DaVinci Resolve, that's great because you are using the best tool out there. However, if you are new to creating films, I strongly recommend utilizing Lumetri color first, because its integration with Premiere is going to make a huge difference in your experience. What's also great about Lumetri color is that it's based on the color editing filters and systems that you may already be familiar with from Photoshop and Lightroom if you are used to using other Adobe software. It's very familiar. Lumetri color allows you to fully manipulate your image using not only basic tools such as changing the tint, changing the temperature, changing the exposure, but if you dive in a little bit deeper, there are lots of very minute and precise changes that you can make to your image, even isolating some colors and making changes that you didn't even realize were possible within your image just using this one filter. And so learning how to use it will not only give you the results that you're looking for, but you can learn more about color grading in general utilizing this tool. And if you're ready to move on to DaVinci Resolve, then that's your time to do so. However, I just want to say I recommend learning this first. It being built into Premiere as just a simple effect that you can apply to your footage is going to make it extremely easy, convenient, and simple for your CMF process, and really should be all you need unless you're already trained in DaVinci Resolve. Another thing worth noting is that it's very easy to overdo it with your color grading and color correction choices. If you're trying to make your image pop, you may be tempted to push the saturation or the contrast to its limits as to what is believable. And if suddenly your image looks very distorted and unnatural, you've done damage rather than helped your situation. So one of the things that I recommend as a guideline is when you push your grade to what you believe looks great and looks really colorful and optimized, consider dialing that back by about 50%. Now, that is not always the way to go. Sometimes having a very colorful and poppy image is what you want. However, if you do dial it back a bit, you're going to ensure that it doesn't look unnatural. And so if you do decide to push it to its limits, just really know how far you can push it, and maybe have a friend or two look at your images and just give you candid feedback on if it looks wacky and if you should dial it back a bit.
So I actually have a part 2 to this video, and to kind of set that up, when I was a Campus Movie Fest participant, I would edit a lot in my dorm room, and I would edit a lot at night just because it's easy to focus then, and probably should have been doing my homework. It all worked out. It's all good. I graduated. But yeah, I was making short films. I was kind of doing freelance work in college and stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time on the computer and color grading. That's really where I learned the basics of it. And so in my dorm room and also in like the library. What's interesting about that is now that I've met who are professional colorists, and some of the things that they think in terms of how color grading should be done is actually very interesting and something that's worth considering. And so I'm going to dive into that now. And I think I'll be able to explain it all in this video. Just a moment. And here we go.
Now, there's a couple of quick tips that I want to give from my experience working with professional colorists. Colorists have pretty strict requirements in the professional realm as to the conditions that they do their work. And what I mean by this is a high-end monitor, being in an isolated room where light sources are not leaking in, and to be in a color neutral area, specifically a very precise hue of gray. Even the lighting conditions that colorists prefer to be in, 6500K, and these very precise conditions are not going to be accessible to you as an editor unless you so happen to know where to get into a color grading studio. The lights of your house or your school or your dorm room is painted a certain color. You're not going to be able to change that. And so there are things that you can do to improve your condition, but just know that these are not required to get good results. They're just recommended and things to consider. Having a good monitor is important, and having that monitor calibrated is important. And it's sometimes difficult to know if your monitor is good or calibrated. So what I recommend is utilizing the best, most expensive monitor you have available to you. Now, if you're using an Apple laptop, you're already in pretty good conditions. The monitor on Apple laptops are not bad. iMacs, same thing. That can't be said for every single laptop. So if you are using your own gear and it may be, older Windows, not particularly expensive, you may want to consider looking at your results of your color grade on multiple monitors. If you have the option to view your color grade on multiple monitor setup, whether that's a TV in addition to your computer monitor, or if you have a friend who has a different laptop than you, try looking at the results on more than one monitor to see, oh, on this monitor, the face looks a little bit greener than it should be. And on this monitor, it looks more purple. I wonder which one is correct. Just knowing that maybe what you're seeing on one monitor is not what's going to be displayed everywhere is important. Even throwing the image over to your cell phone to see what kind of results you get, having more samples to know what your image actually looks like is going to let you know what's the closest to accurate as you possibly can. Naturally, your eyes adjust based on the lighting conditions that you're in. Have you ever taken off your sunglasses outside and all of a sudden everything's really blue? Your eyes naturally try to find a white balance and adjust accordingly based on the conditions of the lighting that you're in. And so if you are in a bright yellow room and you're looking at your monitor, you're going to be influenced by the bright yellow walls, and your image is going to look different in your eyes than if you were in a gray room, which is completely neutral. If you are unable to get to a neutral gray room, being in a room that doesn't have colorful walls is the first step. And being in a room that's not too bright to where you can strictly focus on your monitor is helpful. So some colorists I know prefer to edit at night for that reason, because they haven't painted their walls gray. Again, these conditions can't always be changed, but they're things to consider, and it's just something that you want to check when you're doing your color grades.
Yeah, so it's funny, like as I'm watching like my own video there, like, you know, one of the things, like the very first video that I played was about like Avid and looking at like that Avid hardware. You know, those servers are like 40 grand. And so I've seen monitors from Flanders Scientific that are 60 grand. And so I'm not recommending to anybody that you need anything like that. Like, you can edit off of your gear and get it done. You don't need super expensive stuff. It's a luxury to have. And if you have accessibility to more expensive monitors, just utilize it. That's the point of that. And then also just kind of be aware of what I think it's called color bias is what I was talking about, where your eyes change. And so even if you're in like a white room, that will affect things, or if you're in a room that's painted all black. So the closer to gray, the better. And if you just can't do anything about it, coloring at night is a good option as well. Yes, Byron.
Awesome. We just got another question, and it was, sometimes I find myself editing for hours and hours at a time to hit deadlines. Do you have any advice for going through long editing stretches without going crazy and staying healthy?
Oh, I don't know if I am not crazy or not. Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. Tell you what, give me like 5 seconds, because I actually have a tool on my desk. 1 second. I'm still here. Three more seconds.
Take your time.
These glasses right here. I know they're kind of silly looking, but these are for blue light deflection. And I got like the maximum level. So like they're really yellow. But sometimes when my eyes get strained, I put these on. I don't wear them all the time, but they're nice to have. These are from this company called Gunnar Optic, but you can find all sorts of different ones. But yeah.
And what's the price range on them usually? Are they pretty good?
This one was $50, so it's not too bad. Like, they're not ultra cheap, but they're not bad, and you can get cheaper ones than this. I like the look of this one, so that's why I got it. When it comes to like endurance, like bottom line, okay, so there are some like editing environments, like professionally, where editors are expected to work in like 16-hour blocks by default, because that's what the industry believes is, you know, more efficient. And, you know, most places don't operate like that, but the idea that, I mean, as an editor, you kind of do have to get used to like living in your little cave of computers, and yeah, it's not always super fun. And that's, you know, that's what makes it a job, frankly. And that's okay. But yeah, I mean, I would just say 2 things. Do take breaks, and when you take breaks, go outside. like get fresh air. And you don't even need to take that long of a break. But I know for me, one of the things that's really helpful is I'll walk outside and I'll see like my eyes kind of go like they're like readjusting to like not looking like 3 feet in front of me. And I let my eyes kind of like see long distance nicely, and I get some fresh air. And you know what's great about that is that a lot of times when you're in the zone, you don't want to snap out of the zone, because that's when you're the most efficient. Like you're not thinking about your editing moves, you're just doing them and it's all kind of shaping together. But when you need a break and you can tell you need a break, take it. And a lot of times new ideas of how you can become more efficient or how you can complete the edit differently. Like think of it almost as like time for you to program in your head what you're going to do next with the next like edit block. The other thing too is that you got to get sleep. You got to get sleep. Now you're not like, when it comes to Campus Movie Fest, you know, just prepare yourself for that week. Everyone knows that. And that's part of the fun a little bit. Be safe, you know, don't drive around when you haven't slept. But like, if you work in teams in that way, to where maybe if you're not the only editor, someone could take a night shift. If you have a friend who's a night owl, I know that was me. I was the night owl, and I've got friends now who are the night owl and I'm the day person. Yeah, you just got to figure out how to make it work for you. And then when you're spending that much computer time, you got to just pick up something that has nothing to do with computers, like anything but computers. So don't take a break by playing video games. You got to get away from the screens. And that's my biggest recommendation. Like, and it's really hard because of the pandemic. It's really hard, but like, even if it's just sitting outside and like, I don't know, trying to learn the ukulele or something like that, like anything to get you away from the screens for a bit and let your mind relax, you'll get better thoughts that way.
That's awesome. And what you said, I think, is so smart about you're staring at something 3 feet away from you. So even look at the wall beyond it. Just give your eyes time to adjust to that distance to give you a break. I think that's awesome. Very, very cool. Yeah, all good.
Cool. All right. So I have more topics, and it looks like I'm gonna make it to the end of this, maybe without covering everything, which I see as a success. I'm glad that y'all have asked so many questions. So I'm gonna just quickly, okay. I'm going to use this next video to attempt to answer that question from earlier. We haven't heard back about clarification on that, but it had to. I'm going to go ahead and say I'm interpreting what the question was is, how do you make choices over either different takes, or how to whittle away your footage when you need to make decisions over what's best and what's got to go. That is the fundamental challenge of editing, is to how to let go of what could be gold. Like, how do you know what's the best take and what's the second best take? And in this video, I'm not covering takes as much as I'm covering the experience of how to do that with a large amount of footage. In particular, for me, it was for a documentary. I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. Hopefully it'll be self-explanatory.
A really useful trick that I found when editing a massive documentary that I now recommend to people is, when you're trying to edit something that could be many, many minutes long or many hours long, and you know that the end product needs to be something, let's say 5 minutes long for your Campus Movie Fest film. In order to get that amount of footage cut down to something so small, you filmed all that for a reason, and it's going to be difficult for you to detach and make decisions over what should be cut in a timely manner. And a trick that I would recommend is creating a layer in the timeline. It can be a transparency layer, or it can be any sort of layer that's opacity is set to 0. And this layer should be, let's say, 2 seconds long. And what you would do is to drag this layer around and to find the very best golden moments of your footage that are 2 seconds long. So let's say per clip that you've recorded, unless you absolutely know that you need these clips to be longer, just use that layer. It'll show you exactly what 2 seconds looks like, and blade both sides around that layer of your footage and cut away the rest. Now, that 2 second chunk, when you do that across all of your footage, regardless of how many minutes or hours you've shot, by the time you've done that process to all of your footage, again, keeping aside the content you absolutely know that you must keep and wouldn't make sense as a 2 second clip, you're going to have a very condensed, quick cut sequence that you can reevaluate, and you'll go from hours of footage to a short number of minutes very quickly. And that may be necessary to get you to 5 minutes. From that point, you can easily determine, okay, if I'm still at 15 minutes or 10 minutes and I know I must get it shorter, it's now time to start eliminating some of these 2 second clips that I don't like as much.
Yeah, that was a really useful trick. Like these 2 second little transparency layers. And what it does is it really makes you, like, when you're watching all of the footage of your whatever you filmed for either a documentary or whatever, a lot of times you're going to be tempted to keep longer shots because you feel like each shot is golden. And so this strategy allows you to, it forces you to just pick the very best 2 seconds of what you know you want to keep, but you just can't keep all of it. And so, and then when you compress all of that down and you cut away everything else other than those 2 second chunks, you're going to have very little left, and it's going to basically speed you up to getting something that's much more manageable. That the longest set of footage I've ever worked with before was, I think, 40 hours. And so you can imagine, like, trying to manage that, you have to just be very comfortable with slicing away a lot. And so this method works. Now, if I didn't answer the question that came in that way, the only thing I'll say else is, if we're talking about, live action narrative, when you need to select a best take, the 2 factors to consider are this. How did the actors perform? Was that their best performance? And then the other is, technically speaking, how did we do in terms of shooting it? And it's important that the editor really looks at all the options and even cuts those in to determine what works best. Because essentially, if an angle isn't quite right, it won't cut quite so well, or perhaps the camera is a little bit more shaky on one take, even though the actor and actress performed better. So there's a lot of things to factor. So it's really up to you and or the director. You could be both. So yeah, those are the factors there. All right, so let's see here. Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to probably skip over what's called stylistic overlays. And I'm just going to say that essentially, just like with the music library, you can add things to your film, like film burns and like lens flares and like grungy kind of like dust and grime on as like a video overlay for, flashback sequences or like horror movies. Like, it all just depends. And so yeah, I'm gonna skip that video since I don't think there's gonna be enough time. But look out for those things on the internet if you have a particular idea of a film that might work well with a visual overlay like that. So what I'm going to move on to next is keyframes. Now, I didn't hear anyone asking about keyframes yet, so I'm hoping that you all know on some level what keyframes are. This is going to be sort of a quick overview of some of that. So here we go.
Keyframes are one of the most powerful tools within your editing system. So much so that I would say to a large extent, what you can do with them is almost only limited by your imagination. And what I mean by that is, at first, understanding basic keyframes in terms of how to use scale to slowly creep into a shot, or how to pan and scan to move slowly from left to right of a frame when you're trying to crop something out. That's very helpful. But when you really understand that you can control almost anything within your editing system to make subtle changes and to do very creative edits with that, you'll see that knowing how to use keyframes and having experience with keyframes will really set you apart in terms of your professional editing skills. Going from a more of a hobbyist level to what is a more professional and marketable level. And really it starts with the basics of using scale and rotation and position and opacity, keyframing those to slowly have your shot rotate on a character's face, or to slowly fade your character out of existence with that classic editing trick, making a ghost. But it really gets interesting when you try using keyframes on things like color correction, for instance. If you have your camera accidentally in auto white balance and you walk in from the outside to the inside and the camera has a major shift in color and you want to try to fix that, you're going to need to use keyframes to do that. And having keyframes and finding the gradient at which you can correct and adjust for that change in the camera, and realizing that using keyframes, you can correct and create all sorts of different things. I recommend spending time and experimenting with what keyframes can do and how each filter in Premiere utilizes them, especially in the realm of color and audio.
Yeah, so when I began my editing journey, I feel like when I really started to understand keyframes, that's when I made a huge leap. And that's when people started considering me like a good editor, is when I started to understand that. Because some of the examples I gave in that video in terms of what you can do to scale in and pan and scan and rotate and stuff like that, that's just the beginning. When you learn keyframes, it'll open you up to the world of After Effects, which is when you get into After Effects, like you've gotten to After Effects, And so, if you don't know what keyframes are and maybe you just haven't, said anything, that's all good. Be sure to look it up. Especially if you're really interested in editing, if you're here, I'm assuming you are, keyframes, that's going to be your next step if you don't know what that is. And I recommend you get on that because you'll be glad you did. So, what I'm also probably going, okay. So one that I don't want to miss is about using text. So I'm just going to jump into that next. Here we go.
Premiere has a title tool that's recently gone through changes. Now, when I say recently, it's actually been several years, but there are several options for titles. The first one is the simple text tool, which you can find in the standard toolbar, and I recommend utilizing that to get your bearings on quickly how the text system works in Premiere. However, one other option I recommend exploring is what's called legacy titles. Legacy titles, although seemingly a little clunkier when you check out the interface, has options that I believe are easier to control. And so you want to just have the best results, and utilizing either the newer text tool or the legacy text tool, I recommend trying out both and seeing what you prefer. One of the things to consider when using text is it's very easy to overuse text in a film when you start using it, or to use text in an amateur style. And what I mean by that is poor placement, poor font choice. You can actually bring the perceived level of quality of your film down by making some mistakes like this. So when utilizing text, really consider if you actually need it or not, or if perhaps the same information could be expressed as a voiceover, because sometimes using a voiceover instead of text can give your project more of a film feel rather than a video feel. When a project is full of text, it does sometimes have a video-ish vibe. And the difference between the film vibe and the video vibe, there's a fine line. And that's one way that you can find yourself on the wrong side of it.
All right, so for the sake of time, essentially I'm going to go ahead and just cover a few other things quickly without resorting to video. And so one of the things I highly recommend is factoring in your render time. I've seen so many different people for Campus Movie Fest and other film competitions. They don't factor in their render time and they miss the deadline by a matter of minutes, rendering all the work that they did no good, and they're not eligible to win anything. And so my recommendation for that is, once you really get into your edit and, let's say you're a day out from, the deadline, do a test export, and Premiere will give you a rough estimate of how long it's going to take. That estimate may change later, so you should give yourself extra time on top of that, but you'll know if it plans on popping it out in 20 minutes or an hour. If you've got a lot of effects, it could take multiple hours, and you're going to want to know that before the last minute. Also, for exporting, I know that the Campus Movie Fest provides all sorts of information about that, so I'm probably going to skip over that. But if you're wondering about codecs, H.264.mp4s are still the go-to, and using a high megabit per second is what's really important to maintain your quality of your video. So if you're exporting in 1080p, I recommend 50 megabits a second or higher. And if you're exporting in 4K, 120 megabits a second or higher. That'll make sure that you retain the highest quality, and it's going to look good in the Premiere and online. And there's other specifications with Campus Movie Fest. You probably also need to export a QuickTime MOV, but I'll let you look at the rules and stuff like that for those details. And let's see here. I guess I can probably leave it with that. Let me see if there's any other things here in my notes I just want to hit before it's too late.
Also, Andy, we just got one more question if you wanted to end with the question, or if you wanted to think of your next point as well. But the question was, what are some resources for going into filmmaking for someone who is graduating soon or graduated?
Excellent. Well, you're about to see what the professional world is all about. And I think, first of all, it's an exciting time. Even though what we saw with the pandemic is scary, what we're seeing now is that the world is embracing a more virtual experience all around. And so what's better than that? Because that means that people are going to be working with screens even more. So production's getting shut down and things like that. If you were planning on doing production, luckily you're at a time where people are figuring out what to do about COVID-19, and to where you can probably make it on sets, or you'll see what modern productions look like. So, and if you're going into post or things like that, you're already in your house with computers. So I would say that it's going to be a changing landscape, but I would say where you are actually has a huge impact. I'm from Jacksonville, Florida. There's work in Florida. There's plenty of work in Florida, mostly South Florida. But I moved to Atlanta, and there is a lot of film work here, a lot more film work than in Jacksonville, Florida. You don't necessarily need to go to Los Angeles or New York City, but you do need to be around a place that has opportunities. And yes, a lot of the stuff is remote. That's probably just for now. So keep in mind that like you may need to go to where the jobs are, but they're out there, and to be diligent with your searches, but also probably the most important thing is networking, because so many people are looking at these online posts. Oh, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and say, have an awesome website. Have an awesome website. Having a LinkedIn is great, and having a professional LinkedIn, all that stuff, that's awesome. But like, I know for me, when I see someone took the time to not only make a website, but to make a good website. And if you have a reel on there and the reel is good, you're going to get a job. I'm just saying, yeah, just trust in your abilities, trust in yourself, but you're going to have to put in the legwork to market yourself. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is a website. So there's your answer.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I guess I can, I have so much information that I want to let y'all know, but I think I can let it go. I really enjoyed this experience. And, you know, I don't get to see the audience right now. I don't know who's all out there, but I just hope you know that like Campus Movie Fest is really a once in a lifetime opportunity. Hopefully you do it many years while you're in school. But you're going to develop so many skills just by putting together these stories, like beyond just filmmaking. You're going to learn so much about working with teams, and just if you've been discouraged at all by this pandemic and, you know, the changes that have happened, just remember that if you love stories then, you love stories now, and times are changing, but y'all are the future. So keep making great films, and I hope to see them at the premieres.
And thank you all again so much for watching. And thank you, Andy. That was incredible. We need to do a part 2 because that was awesome. And also all of this workshop and any videos that we weren't able to show you all will be found on our YouTube page and our YouTube channel, and also on our website. So definitely check those out, and feel free to refer to them if you missed anything or wanted more details. A couple things I wanted to bring to everyone's attention just before we do log off is to register for the April Movie Making Week that starts April 6th to the 12th. Get on that now, and that's at campusmoviefest.com. We also have a workshop. So if you like this workshop, we have another one coming up on March 17th at 8 p.m., and that's going to be on location management. Watch out for new spring challenges coming soon from both Disney and Goldman Sachs. And finally, watch out for a CMF social media contest. And that's going to be running through the month of March, and more details will be to come. And thank you again so much for watching this. And this was Campus Movie Fest Workshops. Thank you all.
Bye.